Okay, I have received the go-ahead from the tab room. The live stream should be initiated. According to my phone, it is, let's call it 10:50 Eastern time, which makes all loss 1:05 p.m. Eastern time. And with that, we are ready to start, and the presider can take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Haley Etchison. And before we get started, I want to make sure that all of our scoring judges have muted their video, which I see they have, and also have muted their sound. And we want to make sure that everyone has hidden non-video participants. So that's something I can't see, which means you need to check for yourself whether you see only me and the two competitors who are doing pretrial. That's what it should be. If you need to mute non-video participants, you'll find a little 3 dots in the corner of any of the participant videos that show a muted video. All right. So let's get started. Can I have appearances from the parties?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Karai Rzadi, and I, along with my co-counsel, Riley Lee.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Represent Stevie Rogers in today's case.
Ms. Rogers, I can't hear you, so just make sure that you unmute when you actually come on.
Good morning, Your Honor. My apologies.
Great. No problem. Appearances from the defense?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Edward Nolan. I'm here with my co-counsel, Mr. Jeffrey Ecker.
Morning, Your Honor.
And we're here representing Ms. Drew Mars on behalf of the defense.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Thanks for being here, Ms. Mars. Do we have any pretrial matters from either party?
We do, Your Honor. First off, we'd like to invoke Rules 603 and 615, which are the constructive swearing in and sequestration of all witnesses barring party representatives. And of course, due to the Zoom nature of the trial, the party representatives will again be constructively present during trial.
Understood. No problem with either of those.
Additionally, we'd like to draw your attention to Stipulation 16, which specifies that Exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted into evidence.
Is that your understanding as well, defense?
That's our understanding as well, Your Honor, that we don't need to lay any further foundation to discuss those documents during trial.
Plaintiff, is it your understanding that no further foundation is required as well?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Oh, understood. Great.
And finally, we'd just like to ask that after a sustained objection, would you like us to ask to move to strike or assume the testimony is stricken?
You should move to strike if it's appropriate.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Any pretrial matters from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. With regards to not pre-admitted exhibits, we ask if we were able to present those exhibits constructively before the judge and the witness to have them identify them and ask preliminary questions, and that they may be seen outside the eye shot of the jury for those purposes.
Okay, so let me understand what you are actually planning to do. Does your witness have a copy of the exhibit that you'll be referring to, saying something like, do you have a copy there in front of you, Mr. So-and-so? Or are you actually going to show it to them on the screen and we're all supposed to assume that the jury can't see it?
The latter, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about that, plaintiff?
No, Your Honor, that's what we're prepared for as well.
Great. All right, let's do it that way.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed as well.
Okay, we'll move to opening statements, and everyone should switch to speaker view at this point.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. $20 million, 2 pills, and 1 fingerprint. In today's case, I want you to pay special attention to these 3 pieces of evidence. Because when you do, it becomes clear that it was the defendant, Drew Mars, who killed Agatha Lee for a $20 million payout. Let's start from the beginning. The plaintiff in today's case, Stevie Rogers, had always been close with her grandmother. Growing up, they were practically inseparable. Watching movies, sharing stories, they had your typical loving granddaughter-grandmother relationship. But in 2008, Miss Lee's daughter and Stevie Rogers' mother died in a tragic car accident unexpectedly. All of a sudden, Miss Rogers found it difficult to spend time with her grandmother, Miss Agatha Lee. Memories of her mom and her family, they were too difficult. But Miss Rogers knew that the relationship she had with her grandmother was something special. She knew that no length of time could keep them apart. And that's why in July of 2018, on the 10th anniversary of her mother's death, Miss Rogers knew it was time to reconnect with her grandmother, Miss Agatha Lee. But when she arrived on the doorsteps of Lee Manor, she was surprised to see her grandma wasn't living alone. That's when Stevie Rogers met the defendant, Drew Mars. See, members of the jury, Miss Lee wasn't an ordinary person. She was one of America's best-selling novelists, author of Death in a Bottle, one of the most popular murder mysteries ever written. The success of Miss Lee's novel meant that she was the sole owner of a $20 million estate, including a multi-million-dollar home referred to as Lee Manor. Well, that type of money will get you a lot of attention. But Miss Lee was always wary of those who got too close. That is, besides the defendant. The defendant had been living with Miss Lee for over a decade. And during those 10 years, Miss Lee had learned to trust the defendant. She trusted her so much that in February of 2018, she left the entirety of that $20 million in her will to the defendant. But when Miss Rogers showed back up in the picture, things started to change. Miss Rogers started reconnecting with her grandmother again. They started doing those things they'd done when Stevie was younger. And all of a sudden, with Miss Rogers back in the picture, Miss Lee's only family, Miss Lee decided to rewrite her will. She told Stevie that she was going to rework it to include Miss Rogers as the sole beneficiary of that $20 million. When the defendant overheard this plan, she was furious. She knew she needed to act quickly. She knew she needed to do something before Miss Lee had the chance to formally change her will. And that's why on August 14th, 2018, that same day she overheard that conversation, she came up with a plan. As Miss Lee's primary nurse, the defendant knew that Miss Lee had a rare allergy to chlorandramine, a common over-the-counter medication for heartburn. The defendant also knew that Miss Lee's arthritis medication was identical in size, shape, and color to chlorandramine. All she had to do now was switch those two pills. And on the evening of August 14th, 2018, the defendant slipped into Miss Lee's room and swapped her Winterin pills for chlorandramine. She waited. The next morning, Miss Lee was found unresponsive in her room, having died of a fatal allergic reaction to chlorandramine. How do we know that it was the defendant, Drew Mars? How do we know that it was the defendant who switched her Winterin pills for chlorandramine? Well, today you'll meet Detective Ed Bond, and Detective Bond will tell you that the only piece of forensic evidence found at the scene, well, that belonged to the defendant. Detective Bond will tell you that on a black bag found in the defendant's closet, containing a bottle of those chlorandramine pills, there was a single fingerprint found in the outside zipper. A single fingerprint belonging to the defendant. $20 million, 2 pills, and 1 fingerprint. Now, the legal aspects in today's case are somewhat unusual. We're pursuing the defendant civilly under the Slayer statute. And that means that we bear the burden of proof in today's case. We must show you that it is more likely than not that it was the defendant, Drew Mars, who switched Miss Agatha Lee's pills and caused her death. And at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Karai Rosati, will come before you and ask that you find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Opening for the plaintiff, defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
$20 million for 2 people if they could pin it on one person. Miss Lee got one crucial fact correct. Agatha Lee was killed, and she was killed for money. But not by Miss Mars, Today, you're going to learn that Agatha Lee was killed by Stevie Rogers and her accomplice, Mr. Bond, because Miss Rogers was distanced, disinherited, and desperate. Let's start with that first one, distance. You're going to learn that while Miss Mars lived with and cared for Agatha Lee, Miss Rogers was nowhere to be found. Agatha Lee would write letters to no reply, call to no answer. In fact, for a 7-year period, Miss Rogers talked to her grandmother one time. She had distanced herself away from her family, and that only changed after she became disinherited. Because you're going to hear that for that entire time that Miss Rogers became distanced, she was the sole heir to Agatha Lee's fortune, $20 million. But then in February of 2018, something changed. Miss Lee changed her will and disinherited her distanced granddaughter. Now, at the time, Miss Rogers still had a trust fund, but when that ran out just a couple of months later, she had almost no cash, no job, and no prospects of one. And you're going to learn that it was then, after she became disinherited, that she tracked her grandmother down and spent time with her. But there was a problem. Agatha Lee refused to change her will. And you're going to learn that on August 14th, Miss Rogers begged, and Agatha Lee told her no. And it was at that moment when Miss Rogers became desperate. She was left alone at that house for a couple of hours. She knew that her grandmother took pills every night. She knew where those pills were kept. And she knew that her grandmother was deathly allergic to a drug, chloroandramine. And Miss Rogers also knew about a legal loophole. She knew that if it looked like Miss Mars had killed Agatha Lee, then she would have $20 million to split between two people if she could frame one person. Because you're going to learn that night Agatha Lee died from chloroandramine. And before any police arrived in the morning, someone whom Miss Rogers had hired arrived first. Mr. Bond. Mr. Bond had 5 minutes alone in that house before any law enforcement would arrive. You'll learn that he broke into Miss Mars's bedroom, hacked into her privately protected laptop, and snuck out of that room before anybody had noticed. And that would be the same room where they would find chloroandramine a week later. Drew Mars loved Agatha Lee. She certainly didn't kill her. But it's the plaintiff's burden to prove to you otherwise. They have to prove that Miss Mars killing Agatha Lee is more likely than any alternative explanation. But when they can't do that, because you'll learn that it was Miss Rogers who was distanced, disinherited, and desperate, we're going to ask that you allow Miss Mars to keep what's rightfully hers, and that you find her not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let's all switch to gallery view now. And plaintiff, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers. Ms. Rogers, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. May I proceed? Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, I'm Stevie Rogers.
And what do you do currently?
I'm a writer. I've been working on some mystery novels, but I can't say I have the same talent as my grandmother did.
And where do you live, Miss Rogers?
I live in Midlands. I've had an apartment here ever since my grandmother passed away.
Miss Rogers, who was Agatha Lee to you?
She was my grandmother, my mother's mother.
And were you close?
Yes, very close. She was the only grandparent I had ever known, and we spent a lot of time together when I was young. I think I spent nearly as much time with her as I did with my own parents, and even when I was in college, I would spend my breaks with her.
Did you remain close with her as you got older?
I did up until my junior year of college at Sawyer Shaw University.
What happened that year?
Well, in the summer of that year, on the 4th of July weekend, my parents got into a car accident and they passed away. And since then, it was really hard for me to see my grandmother because she just looked and reminded me so much of my mom and just my parents. And all my memories with her were tied to my parents that it was too much to be near her or even talk to her. So we lost touch for a few years.
How did you end up reconnecting with your grandmother?
In 2018, it was a 10-year anniversary of my parents' death, and I hadn't seen any family in that period, and she was the only family that I had. And I thought after all that time that I could finally see her and not have it dredge up all those bad memories again. So I went to go see her in Midlands, and I think I made the right decision.
And when exactly did you come to live with your grandmother?
In early July of 2018 that year.
And was it just you and your grandma living there?
I thought it would be, but it was her and her live-in caretaker, Drew Mars, the defendant.
And when you started living with your grandma, how did your relationship change?
Honestly, it was amazing. I thought after years of not seeing her that it'd be odd or it would take some time like for us to reconnect or anything, but it wasn't like that at all. We just got to talking and it was as if no time had ever passed between us.
So Ms. Rogers, I want to talk to you about your grandma's original will written in 2008. Who was the beneficiary?
It was me.
And did you have any involvement in putting this will together?
No, I didn't.
Did you ask to be put in the will?
No, of course not.
Do you know of any changes that were made to the will after 2008?
I did. A while ago, Nana let me know that I wouldn't be in it any longer.
How'd you feel about that?
I mean, I wasn't thrilled, but I understood. I hadn't talked to her in a while, and it was her life, her money, her estate, so I understood.
Ms. Rogers, I want to talk a little bit more about the defendant in today's case. Who was Drew Mars?
He was my grandmother's live-in caretaker.
And how long did he work? Did she work for your grandmother?
So I know that she had been with my grandmother since she lived in Alabama. So for a while, I think for a number of years.
Ms. Rogers, do you know what chlorandramine is?
Yes, Drew mentioned it to me once or twice.
What do you mean by that?
So I remember we were just in Lee Manor one day. He told me just out of the blue that my Nana had a fatal allergy to it, that even if she took one pill, that she could die instantly.
Ms. Rogers, I want to turn your attention to August 14th, 2018. Did you speak to your grandma that day?
I did. So after breakfast that morning, she called me into her study and she was just talking to me about how much she loved that I was back and how we got to talking and reconnecting. And she was just glad that we got to spend a lot of time together. I told her I felt the exact same way.
Was that the extent of that conversation?
No, she also told me right after that she'd be re-including me in her will and leaving everything to me, and that she'd be calling her lawyer later to I guess like formalize it and whatnot.
Did she tell you why she was planning on doing that?
She was really glad that we got to spend time together again and reconnect, and she wanted me to be taken care of.
Was that the end of that conversation?
Yes, pretty much. I mean, I think we hugged and we exchanged a few more words, but then she had to go to lunch that day with her biographer. And then I walked out of her study when I saw the defendant, as if he had been just up against the door listening.
Objection,
What do you
Your
mean?
Lack of personal knowledge. May I be heard?
Yes, you may.
The witness testified that it looked like Ms. Mars had been listening to the entire conversation. She'd have a lack of personal knowledge because, as she said, the door was closed. She was on one side and Ms. Mars was on the other. She would have no idea what Ms. Mars was doing on the other side of it.
Your response,
Your Honor?
plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The witness testified that she saw the defendant up against the door as if she had been listening. Ms. Rogers is free to testify about her own personal experience at that moment. She's certainly free to say that it appeared as though the defendant was listening.
She didn't say that it appeared as though the defendant was listening. She said she was leaning up against the door as if she had been listening. I understand that she's trying to describe her experience of what the defendant looked like to her. But I'm concerned about the personal knowledge issue here, that the jury might take the plaintiff's testimony as though the plaintiff actually knew whether the defendant was listening. So defense, would you be amenable to a limiting instruction? I don't think it's inadmissible the way she said it, but I do share your concern. Are you okay with a limiting instruction?
Yes, Your Honor, a limiting instruction would be fine.
Great, let's do that constructively and move on.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rogers, after that conversation with your grandmother, what did you do that evening?
So Nan and I had an early dinner around 9:30 after we watched a movie. We watched Gone Girl that night. And then I was about to head downstairs around 9:30. I was just walking down the stairs when I saw the defendant again.
Could you see what she was doing?
Yes, she was walking from her own room in like the direction of my Nana's room.
Did you notice anything else?
Yeah, she was walking with her arms with her right hand raised as if she was holding something in it.
And what time was that?
Your Honor, once again, to lack of personal knowledge, whether or not Ms. Mars would have been holding something in her right hand.
I can rephrase, Your Honor.
Well, you don't need to rephrase. It's the witness's testimony that's a problem. I see this as a little bit different than the last testimony that received an objection because, well, defense, tell me what you want me to do.
Your Honor, I think it's fair for this witness to say that she saw Ms. Mars walking towards the direction of Miss Lee's bedroom. You can say that she saw her hand was clenched, but it's not fair for her to say it looked like she was holding anything. She didn't have a great view. She couldn't see if she actually was. Does it suggest that to the jury when she has a lack of personal knowledge? It would be inappropriate.
You just argued weight, not admissibility. I think you could have made a different argument. I'm interested to hear the plaintiff's response.
Again, Your Honor, Ms. Rogers testified that she saw the defendant walking into her grandmother's bedroom with holding her hands a certain way as if she was holding something. She didn't say that she knew the defendant was holding anything. She didn't say what the defendant was holding. Just at that time, it appeared to her that the defendant was holding something, and she's free to do so.
Yeah, I think that I'm concerned about the plaintiff's testimony. I think that she's trying to tell the jury things that she doesn't actually know. So I'm going to caution plaintiff to stop doing that. However, with your argument, defense, you convinced me that you could cross on this and that any prejudice associated with the plaintiff's testimony as it's on the record now would be ameliorated by your cross. So I hope to see you cross on that, and I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Your Honor, just to be clear, that testimony has been allowed in?
That's right. The objection is overruled and the testimony remains on the record as it was stated.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Rogers, after you saw the defendant, what did you do next that evening?
Not much. So I left my Nana around 9:30 and I just walked downstairs when I saw Drew Mars with his palms raised and his fist clenched. And then I went to bed that night. I fell asleep on the couch and then I was woken up the next morning after I had headed back upstairs around 2, and then she woke me up around 8:30.
Ms. Rogers, I just want to be very clear for the jury. What time did you see the defendant?
I saw Drew Mars Right after 9:30, so within a few minutes or so.
Ms. Rogers, are you familiar with your grandmother's autopsy report?
I am.
Would you recognize it if I showed it to you today in court?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, permission for the plaintiff to display Exhibit 2 has already been pre-entered pursuant to the stipulation.
No problem. Yes.
So, Ms. Rogers, looking at this autopsy report, can you tell us what time your grandmother ingested chloramine?
Yes. According to the report, it says she would have ingested between 9 p.m. on the 14th after I left her, and then 3 a.m. on the morning of the 15th.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. And just one last question. What happened that next morning?
Well, like I said, I woke up to Drew banging on my door with the worst news I could have ever heard. She told me that my Nana had died. I couldn't believe it. I'd spent way too long away from her and way too long away from her family. And then right when I got there, she passed away and she was all I had left.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Nothing further.
Cross, Your Honor.
Yes.
May I proceed? Ms. Rogers, I'd like to start off about something you just told the jury. Now, you told the jury that it looked like Miss Mars was holding something, right?
Yes, she was walking from her room and her palm was open, but it was raised and her fingers were closed.
Miss Rogers, to be clear, you didn't see if she was actually holding anything.
No, I couldn't see. I was at the bottom of the stairs.
For all you know, she could have been holding a tissue.
I guess so.
Miss Rogers, for all you know, she could have been holding nothing in her hand, right?
I guess.
All right, so let's talk about your relationship with your grandmother. Now, in 2011, you dropped out of law school.
I did. It was just too competitive for me, and I wish I had chosen a different degree path at that point.
And after you dropped out of law school, you didn't see your grandmother again until 2018.
No, it was too painful to me to be near her. It would just bring up all these memories of my parents again. So I tried to stay away.
So to be clear, I'm correct on that timeline, right?
Yes,
But your grandmother, she tried to stay in touch, right?
she did. She wrote me and called me a few times, and I listened and I read them, but I didn't respond.
So to be clear, your grandmother wrote you letters.
Yes,
She tried calling you.
yes. And I called her once too on her birthday.
Well, you never picked up the phone when she called.
No, I didn't. No,
You never wrote back the letters.
no.
In that 7-year stretch, you talked to your grandmother one time.
That's right.
And it was in July of 2018 that you went to see your grandmother, right?
Yes, it had been 10 years since my parents had passed. I just needed to be around family at that point.
Well, let's talk about the timing of that decision a little bit more. Now, when you stopped talking to your grandmother in 2011, you were the sole heir to her fortune, right?
Yes.
You knew that if she died, you'd inherit everything.
Yes, that's correct.
But then in February of 2018, something changed, right?
Yes,
You became disinherited.
I did.
Your grandmother cut you out of the will entirely.
Yes,
But in February of 2018, you still had a trust fund, right?
yes, I did from my parents after they had passed away.
That trust fund was originally worth around $2 million.
Yes, it was.
And that trust fund allowed you to travel the world.
I did. After I left law school, I just need to get away from the country.
But then in June, that trust fund ran out.
Yes.
You had almost no cash to your name.
I had my car and some nice watches that I could sell. I was planning to finish my books, but I did have some cash.
You had almost no cash to your name, yes or no?
I had a few thousand in
Yes or
savings.
no, Ms. Rogers?
I guess no cash on me at that point.
And to be clear, you didn't have a job either, right?
No, like I said, I was writing.
You never finished those books.
No, not yet.
And so it was only after you became disinherited and you had almost no cash that you went to see your grandmother, right?
Yes, it was a few months after.
All right. So let's talk about August 14th. Like you testified to, you talked to your grandmother that day.
I did. She called me into her study that morning.
And then after that conversation, she went to lunch, right?
Yes, with her biographer.
You were left alone in that house for a couple of hours.
Yes, I read. I tried to write some more, but I didn't do much that day.
Just to be clear, you were alone, right?
Yes.
Now, there are no cameras in Lee Manor.
Not that I know of.
There's only one bedroom door that locks, right?
Yes,
And to be clear, that's your grandmother's door.
I'm pretty sure. Yep.
But there are actually two different ways to get into your grandmother's bedroom, right?
Yes.
Now, you knew that your grandmother took pills every night before she went to bed.
She did.
You knew that.
Yes, I did know that.
You knew she kept those pills right next to her bedside table.
Yes, she took them every night, so I think she usually kept them on her nightstand, maybe, or like our table.
Right. And you knew like clockwork, she'd go to bed between 10 and 10:30, right?
Pretty much.
So, Miss Rogers, let's talk about chloroangiopy. You knew that your grandmother was deathly allergic to that drug, right?
Yes, Drew Marsh. She told me about that after I'd moved to Lee Manor at some point.
You knew one pill could kill your grandmother.
Yes, that's what Drew told me.
And you knew it was an over-the-counter medication.
Yes.
That would mean you wouldn't need a special prescription to buy some at a pharmacy.
Yes, I think that's what over the counter means.
And to be clear, you knew all of this information when you were left alone at Lee Manor on August 14th.
I guess Drew did tell me before that, so yes.
So let's talk about your grandmother's will. It was your understanding that if she died, as her will currently read, everything would go to Miss Mars, right?
Yes.
Her entire estate, right?
Yep.
But you also knew about the Slayer statute, right?
Yes, I learned about it in law school.
You knew that if it looked like Miss Mars had killed Agatha Lee, all her money would go to her living relative, right?
Yes. Under the statute, the person that kills somebody can't inherit their estate, I think, for obvious reasons.
So you're her only living relative, right?
Yes.
So you knew if it looked like Miss Mars had killed Agatha Lee, all the money would go to you.
Yes, because Drew, yes.
And to be clear, Miss Rogers, you had learned all this information prior to when you were left alone at Lee Manor on August 14th. Isn't that right?
I guess so, yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Yes.
Ms. Rogers, have you ever bought chlorandramine?
No, I haven't. I don't even know what it looks like.
Do you know where you could buy it?
I think Drew Marsh told me at a pharmacy, but I've never inquired or tried to.
Do you know what pills your grandmother takes on a daily basis?
No, that was all Drew Marsh's
Objection,
job.
Your
I
Honor.
never handled any of that.
Objection, Your Honor. That last question, what specific pills she took, is outside the scope of my cross-examination.
Your response?
Your Honor, I do believe during the cross-examination that opposing counsel inquired about what type of pills Ms. Agatha Lee took, where her pills were stored next to her bedside table. Therefore, these questions are well within the scope of this cross.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Certainly.
To be clear, I never asked if she knew what type of pills her grandmother took. I did ask about chloroangiopine. That was not a pill that Miss Lee would have ever taken knowingly. Since I never asked that question specifically about the other types of pills, that question is outside the scope.
I remember you crossing on the location of the pills and the plaintiff testifying that the pills were on the nightstand or she believed so. And I don't see the rule about redirect and the scope of cross-examination being as limited as you see it. I think that you address the general topic of the pills and that the rule is intended to prevent the plaintiff from opening a brand new topic. Essentially like if they forgot to do it on direct. I don't think that's what's happening here. So I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, I'll just re-ask. Do you know what medications your grandmother took?
No, no idea. Like I said, that was all Drew's job.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Nothing further.
Any recross?
None, Your Honor.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank
Plaintiff
you.
can call their next witness.
The plaintiff calls Detective Bond. May I proceed, Your Honor? Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Marty Bond.
What is it that you do for a living, Mr. Bond?
I'm a PI, a private investigator, that is, here in Midlands, along with numerous other states.
What do you do as a private investigator?
Well, essentially, I solve cases that common folk can't, whether that be finding a missing relative or proving a case of infidelity. However, my most notable cases include such things as murder, robbery, and kidnapping. I've quite literally seen and solved it all.
How'd you get into that field, sir?
I like to think it was my own intuition. Even as a young man, I found myself solving cases. I'll never forget my first. Age 4, the case of the missing biscuits from the pantry. The culprit, my brother. Age 3. I guess you can say it comes naturally.
Have you received any certifications in the field?
Of course, I have my private investigator's license in Midlands, along with years and years of experience and dozens of solved cases.
How are you involved in today's case?
I was hired by Stevie Rogers to assist in the murder investigation of her grandmother, Agatha Lee, the Agatha Lee.
How did you first meet Stevie Rogers?
I was first contacted by Stevie Rogers on June 5th of 2018 with a rather pedestrian request. She wanted help finding her missing grandmother. And in 2 days' time, I returned to Stevie with her grandmother's location in Midlands, and she paid me in cash for my work. At that point in time, I truly thought the matter to be closed, and I honestly didn't expect a follow-up.
Were you ever contacted by Miss Rogers again?
I was. On August 15th of 2018, at 8:45 a.m., I got a call from Stevie Rogers.
Why'd she call?
Well, I picked up the phone to learn that Stevie's grandmother, Agatha Lee, had been murdered, and Stevie wanted me there on the scene. Being the punctual man I am, I arrived at Lee Manor at 9:25 a.m.
What happened once you arrived at Miss Lee's house?
Well, I went through the unlocked front door, and I found my way to Miss Lee's room. Inside her room was Stevie Rogers, the in-home caretaker, Drew Mars, and poor Miss Lee, dead on her bed.
Were there any police when you arrived at Lee Manor?
Not as soon as I arrived. I beat the fuzz, so to speak. But about 5 minutes later, 9:30, a Detective Nora Khan from the Midland State Police Department arrived.
And what did the detective do when she arrived?
Detective Khan, understandably, asked Stevie and I to step out of the room so she could talk with the in-home caretaker about Miss Lee.
What did you do during those 5 minutes or so?
After speaking with Stevie, I decided to put the I in PI, and I did some investigating myself. This led me to Drew Mars's bedroom, where I walked through the unlocked door, and I went into her computer that was sitting on her bed, cracked the code in 4 tries, and sifted through her emails for anything pertaining to Miss Lee's death.
Did you do anything else while you were in Drew Mars's room at that time?
No. Once I found an email of interest, I took a picture of it and left the room.
Would you recognize a copy of that email if I were to show it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 13.
Constructively, yes.
Now, what do you see here, Mr. Bond?
Well, this is the email of interest that I photographed on that day.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that email?
It appears to be.
Your Honor, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Defense?
Excuse me. Pursuant to evidentiary ruling number 13, there are no objections.
Really? All right. Exhibit 13 received.
Now, Detective Bond, what did this email say?
Oh, besides the colorful subject line, Drew Mars is stating that she learned that she is the sole heir to Miss Lee's estate, meaning if Miss Lee were to die, Drew Mars was set to inherit the house, cash, automobiles, everything, absolutely everything. The email ends with Drew stating, and I quote, "This is going to totally change my life."
Did you speak with Miss Mars again on August 15th?
Briefly, I ran into Miss Mars outside of her bedroom, where in that short period of time, she alerted me to Miss Lee's allergy to chloroandramine. It's an over-the-counter heartburn medication. But to Miss Lee, I learned it was poison.
Did you talk about anything else with Miss Mars?
I did ask Miss Mars if I could search her bedroom. However, she respectively declined.
So what was the next step in your investigation?
I asked Detective Nora Khan if she would run a tox screen on Miss Lee's body in order to reveal any potential poisons or traces of suspicious substances in her bloodstream.
And was a toxicology screen performed?
Not at first. You see, an old woman found dead in her bed doesn't necessarily merit a tox screen. However, after the will reading of Miss Lee's will, that changed.
Why after the reading?
Well, that's when the public became aware that Drew Mars was the sole heir to Miss Lee's estate.
Would you recognize a copy of Miss Lee's autopsy if I were to show it to you today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 2, which has already been entered into evidence.
Yes.
Now, do you recognize what's up on the screen, Mr. Bond?
Yes, this is the same autopsy we just spoke of.
What did the autopsy say in relation to the tox screen?
Well, as you can see in that highlighted portion, chloroandramine was in fact found in Miss Lee's bloodstream. Same drug Drew Mars had told me about.
And how does the autopsy say that Miss Lee died?
Chloroandramine was the cause of death for Miss Lee.
Now, Detective Bond, were there any chloroandramine pills found at the crime scene?
In fact, there were. Although I was denied formal access to Drew Mars's bedroom, Detective Khan was not, after a warrant, of course. She was able to search the house along with Drew Mars's bedroom as I spectated, and that's where the chloroandramine pills were located.
Where exactly in the bedroom were they found?
In Drew Mars's bedroom, there's a closet. And in the closet, there was a small black bag. And in that small black bag, there was a pill container. And that's where the chloroandramine pills were.
Was there anything else notable about that black bag found in the defendant's room?
Yes, there was. The only piece of forensic evidence found on that bag was a single fingerprint on the zipper, to be exact.
And whose fingerprint was found on that black bag with the chloroandramine in it?
That fingerprint belonged to Drew Mars, the in-home caretaker.
Thank you, Detective Bond. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Bond. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mr. Nolan. Good afternoon to you as well.
All right, let's get into it. Now, you met Stevie Rogers on June 5th, 2018.
I received a call from Stevie Rogers that day. We didn't meet, however. She sent me a letter and she asked me to help find her grandmother.
And that's when you traveled down to Monroeville, Alabama to help find her.
Yes, that's correct. And then I looked into some past business records of Agatha Lee, which led me to her location.
That's right. You were able to find her current address.
That's correct, yes, in Midlands.
In exchange for that address, Ms. Rogers gave you $10,000.
Yes, she paid me $10,000 for my work. And although the address of the Agatha Lee would have been worth more to the tabloids, I respect family.
All right, Mr. Bond. Well, let's talk about when you actually met Ms. Rogers. That was on August 15th, 2018.
Yes, that's when I received the call from Stevie and I arrived at Lee Manor.
You received that call at 8:45 a.m.?
Yes, I believe so.
Stevie Rogers told you that her grandmother had been murdered.
Yes, Stevie seemed to be flustered. She was spouting out all sorts of things, so I came over.
You dropped everything and got there immediately.
Yes, a little embarrassing. I was at the Dunkin' Donuts about 10 miles away. Dropped my donut, I went over there.
All right, Mr. Bond. When you got there were no police there.
No, I arrived 5 minutes before Detective Nora Khan arrived.
In your own words, you got there before the fuzz.
Before the fuzz, that's correct, yes.
Now, Mr. Bond, there were no law enforcement officials there at that time at all.
No, I was the first outside party to arrive, and I went directly to Miss Lee's bedroom.
Now, right after Detective Khan got there, she asked you and Stevie Rogers to leave the bedroom.
Yeah, she wanted to speak with the in-home caretaker. I'm not sure what they spoke about, but I assume it was about Miss Lee's health.
Detective Khan left you and Stevie Rogers alone in Lee Manor.
That's correct. We were in the waiting room, and that's when Stevie informed me that Agatha had told her she was adding her back into the will.
Mr. Bond, redirecting you back to my question, she left you alone for a half hour.
Yes, we rendezvoused back at 10 a.m.
So for a half hour, Detective Khan left you alone with Stevie Rogers in Lee Manor.
Yes, although I was not with Stevie the entire time.
That's right. After you finished talking to Stevie Rogers, you broke into the room of Drew Mars.
Yes, as I walked into the unlocked front door, I walked through Miss Mars's unlocked bedroom door.
Now, when you got in there, during that half hour, you broke into her computer.
That's correct. I went into her computer, sifted through her emails for anything pertaining to Miss Lee's death.
Now, let's talk about what you didn't have when you entered that room. You didn't have any witnesses with you.
I was alone. That's correct.
You didn't have the permission of Drew Mars.
That is also correct.
You didn't have the permission of Detective Khan.
That is correct as well.
Now, you're not a police officer.
No, I am not.
So you also didn't have a search warrant.
That is also correct.
Now, you didn't tell anyone that you'd entered that room.
No, I wanted to see how things played out.
You didn't tell Detective Khan, who was right upstairs, that you broke into Drew Mars's room.
I did not tell Detective Khan that I walked into Drew Mars's bedroom, no.
You didn't tell Detective Khan that you broke into her computer.
That's correct. Not until after the will reading.
It took you 7 days to tell Detective Khan this.
Right, that's correct.
All right, well, we just talked about some of your investigation into Drew Mars. Let's talk about your investigation into Stevie Rogers. At no point did you read through Ms. Rogers' emails.
No, I did not.
At no point did you break into Ms. Rogers' computer without her permission.
No, I did not.
At no point did you break into Ms. Rogers' room without her permission.
No, I did not.
At no point did you question Ms. Rogers regarding Agatha Lee's allergies.
I did not, no.
At no point did you inform Detective Khan that Ms. Rogers had promised you $25,000 for your work there that day.
No, although I assume she expected I was getting paid, as I let her know I am a consultant. This is my job. I get paid for it.
I'm not asking for you to assume what Miss Khan knew or didn't know. I'm asking whether or not you told Detective Khan. And you didn't tell Detective Khan that you'd been promised $25,000 for being there on August 15th.
No, I did not tell her that I was getting paid $25,000 for my work.
All right, well, let's move on to the later part of your investigation. You mentioned on direct that you returned to Lee Manor on August 21st.
Yes, I did. I don't know if I mentioned that, but yes, I did.
Well, you mentioned the search with Detective Khan.
Oh, yes, correct.
That took place on August 21st?
Yes.
On that day, Detective Khan had a search warrant for the premises.
That's right. She allowed me to spectate as well.
Well, let's be clear, Mr. Bond. She allowed you to spectate after Stevie Rogers requested that you be allowed to.
Yes, and she had no problem with it. She saw no issue.
Stevie Rogers was adamant that you be there to spectate.
That was correct.
Now, Stevie Rogers and Drew Mars were asked to leave the premises.
That's right, as the house was getting searched and both their rooms are in the house.
You were the only person in that house at that time with Detective Khan.
Yes, Detective Khan and I searched the house. Well, I spectated as she searched.
You were the only person while she was there in Drew Mars's room.
That is correct.
You were the only person with Detective Kahn when she found those pills of chlorandramine.
That is also correct.
Now, those were found in Stevie Rogers' closet.
No, they were found in Drew Mars's closet.
Excuse me, in Drew Mars's closet, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
You think you'd recognize a photograph of that closet if I were to show it to you?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, I am displaying what's been previously identified as Exhibit 14. At this time, it's not in evidence, so we ask that it be outside the eyeshot of the jury. Now, Mr. Bond, this is a photograph that Detective Kahn took of that closet.
Yes, that looks to be it.
Now, right over here, if you can see my cursor, that's the black bag that was found there.
That is correct.
That's where you say the chlorandramine pills were found.
Right, the chlorandramine pill bottle was inside and the pills were inside the pill bottle.
You don't know how that bag got there.
I do not.
You don't know how the pills got in that bag.
I do not. The only forensic evidence was tied to the zipper on the bag, which belonged to Drew Mars's fingerprint.
Now, there was no forensic evidence that tied Drew Mars to that bag, to the pill bottle in that bag, was there?
No, just the fingerprint on the zipper.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 14.
Without objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 14 is received.
Now, Detective Pond, when you found that black bag in Drew Mars's room with Detective Kahn, you still hadn't told Detective Kahn that you'd broken into Drew Mars's room 6 days earlier.
That's correct. I told her after the will reading.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bond. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective Bond, is $25,000 a standard fee for you to receive?
It's pretty typical for my work, yes.
Have you been promised any additional money based on the outcome of today's trial?
No, absolutely not.
Did Stevie Rogers ever mention you two splitting a $20 million inheritance?
No, I work for the truth. I'm not splitting anything with Stevie.
No, Mr. Bond, did you ever hide anything from the police by the time the end of the investigation came around?
No, I told them and gave them everything I had found.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, Detective Bond.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Anything else from the plaintiff?
Thank you.
No, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff rests, and we just request a brief 5-minute recess before we proceed to the defense's case in chief.
Okay, we'll be back at 11:47 Eastern Time.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'm going to close the breakout rooms now, bring our competitors back. Judges, could you confirm that you are back by either sending me a private message or turning on your video briefly so we can just confirm that you're all here? Ryan, I've got, okay. Just confirming. I've seen. Okay. Sarah's back. You may have turned on your video and I may have missed it. Can we just confirm that Judge Merkel and Judge Burns are back? I see you both. Thank you. Okay. Let me confirm. Judge Etchison, we are good to go.
All right, we can have the parties back for the defense case now. Welcome back.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And do we have a plaintiff attorney as well? There we are.
Yes,
Great. All right, defense, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Drew Mars to the stand. And just to clarify, it appears there's a question in the chat. Did Riley Lee get back in the video?
Yes.
Okay, so we're all good to go, Your Honor?
We're all set. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
My name is Drew Mars.
And where do you call home?
I live at Lee Manor. I used to live there with my employer, Agatha Lee, until she passed.
How'd you first come to work for Agatha Lee?
I was hired as her assistant caretaker in 2008 and became her full-time caretaker in 2009.
Could you describe some of your job responsibilities?
Agatha had a heart attack in 2008, so I was responsible for her physical therapy, delivering her medication, and other required nursing care. I was there to look after her.
Now, could you describe your relationship with Agatha Lee?
Working with Agatha was my first job, my only job. She was incredibly generous. I was primarily her professional caregiver, but over the years, we became very close. Living together, we played games, ate meals together, and she became more than just a patient. She was like a grandma to me.
And do you know if Miss Lee had any family nearby?
2008 was a hard year for the Lee family. Agatha's only daughter and son-in-law died in a car crash in July, right when I started working for her. Agatha's granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, wasn't exactly nearby all the time, but Stevie is Agatha's only living relative.
Could you describe the relationship between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers?
To my knowledge, Stevie and Agatha grew very distant after the incident in 2008. When Agatha's daughter died, Stevie stopped coming to visit, stopped calling. She would often talk about it, and there were nights we would stay up late and discuss. It seemed to me that the distance broke Agatha's heart.
Objection, Your Honor.
Didn't.
You're set. May I explain?
Yes.
Now, the witness just testified that the way she learned all this was through Agatha Lee, and so her relaying those statements to the jury are hearsay.
So which statements are you objecting to, counsel?
That Agatha Lee told the defendant that her and Stevie had grown apart, that Stevie stopped calling, that they stopped talking, that Agatha was heartbroken.
So the last maybe 4 or 5 questions and answers.
Most of the answer of this question, yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe this witness relayed what she had seen for the most part, specifically that Stevie stopped calling, stopped writing, stopped visiting. That's certainly just what she observed. That's no statements that she's relying on. And as for that last part, that Agatha Lee was heartbroken, her describing that to Miss Mars, crying, heartbroken, that would fall under hearsay exception 8033, a then existing emotional condition.
Your Honor,
Is there a statement, I feel heartbroken, or is Ms. Mars observing conduct that makes her believe that Ms. Lee was heartbroken?
I believe her testimony was that she stayed up with Miss Lee late nights, and Miss Lee would cry and tell her that she was heartbroken.
Got it.
Your Honor, Mayor,
Okay. Yes.
we agree that the statement she was heartbroken falls under 8033. We have no problem with that statement.
Got
However,
it.
she testified that the way she knew that she stopped calling, that they grew apart, was because Agatha told her that. She wouldn't be able to tell us that Stevie didn't call Agatha because she's not Agatha. She learned that through hearsay, and her relaying that to the jury is hearsay that's being used for the truth of the matter.
I agree that it probably is. I'm interested in defendant's response to the objection regarding those earlier statements, not the last statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Her earlier statements that Stevie Rogers stopped calling, stopped visiting, and stopped writing, those were all based on her observations. And her saying that it seemed like they had grown apart was her rationally based perception because she never saw the plaintiff contact Agatha Lee. Those weren't based on statements that Agatha Lee told her, but rather her own observations that we've laid the foundation.
Did Ms. Mars ever witness Ms. Lee interact with her granddaughter before Ms. Rogers came to live at Lee Manor?
Yes, Your Honor. Originally in 2008, when Miss Mars first started working for Miss Lee, she did observe interactions between the two. And then after 2011, she stopped seeing those interactions.
Got it.
Your Honor, may I
Okay.
respond?
Yes.
This witness can certainly testify that while she was home, she didn't see Stevie visit. However, as to them growing apart, that the nature of their relationship had changed, that they didn't write or call, is outside of what this witness would be able to know, unless it's testimony from Agatha Lee. That would make it, I'm sorry, unless it's being relayed by Agatha Lee.
So your objection is to lack of foundation then. She didn't quote a bunch of things that Ms. Lee said. She's not offering statements by Ms. Lee. She's saying a bunch of stuff that you believe she only knows because Ms. Lee told her. Is that right?
Well, Your Honor, the way I'd understood her original answer is that she'd known her and Agatha Lee talked about it. But if the opposing counsel saying that she just knew and it wasn't from those conversations, then yes, I would change my objection to lack of foundation.
Got it. Which of those is it, defense counsel?
Your Honor, we've laid the foundation that she worked for Agatha Lee since 2008, that she lived with her, that she spent the abundance of time that she lived at Lee Manor with Agatha Lee. So therefore, we've laid that foundation for her to know, in her own opinion, if they had grown apart, because we've laid the foundation that Stevie Rogers stopped calling, stopped visiting, and stopped writing. So she observed those early interactions with the two, and then
Wait. That's what we're worried about. That Ms. Rogers stopped calling, stopped visiting. How does Ms. Mars know that?
Well, Your Honor, I believe her testimony was to her knowledge that Stevie Rogers stopped calling, stopped visiting, and stopped writing letters. So only what she observed. That's her
I'm going to
testimony.
sustain an objection to lack of foundation. You can lay foundation for how she knows those things if it's not hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor.
Strike that testimony until that foundation is laid.
Yes. So the witness's answer up until the testimony about Ms. Lee being heartbroken is stricken. The sentence, including the heartbroken stuff, is in.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
So, Miss Mars, when you first started working for Agatha Lee, did you ever see Miss Rogers and Miss Lee interact?
Yes. Like I said, the Lee family lived right by, so Stevie and her parents would often come over. It was a very happy time at Lee Manor.
And then from 2011 to when Stevie Rogers visited in 2018, did you ever hear Miss Rogers and Miss Lee talking to each other?
To my knowledge, no. And I was with Agatha most of the time.
Did you ever see a letter written by Miss Rogers to Miss Lee?
No, I would collect the mail and give it to Agatha, or if it was addressed to me, keep it. And nothing was addressed from Stevie.
And if Miss Lee ever called her granddaughter, did you ever hear Miss Rogers pick up the phone?
No, typically No.
And did Miss Lee ever tell you how that affected her?
Yes. Like I earlier said, we would spend many nights staying up talking about what was going on with Agatha, crying. And Agatha told me she was very heartbroken. Stevie didn't come back to visit until about a decade later in July 2018. And that was a few months after Agatha changed her will.
Now, did you know that Agatha Lee had changed her will?
Yes. She wrote her first will in 2008, and I was actually a witness. When she changed it in February of 2018, she told me that she decided to include me in her will.
And what was your initial reaction to being included in the will?
I felt undeserving. I grew up in a family that didn't have much money. We lived in a small home. I shared a bedroom with my sibling, and my grandparents lived with us. The idea of inheriting millions of dollars was odd.
And so while working with Miss Lee, did you remain close with your own family?
Yes, absolutely. I sent the majority of my paychecks to them, almost everything. My youngest sister, Nina, is very ill, so a lot of that money went toward medical treatment and rent for my family.
So, Miss Mars, I'd like to shift focus to August 14th. Do you remember that day?
Yes, that was the last day I spent with Agatha.
And how did your day start?
Well, I cleaned my room and did laundry for the household. Stevie had been making Agatha breakfast since she started staying with us, and afterwards they ate in the study.
Now, do you know what happened when they went to that study?
No, but when I was going to get Agatha for her lunch appointment, I overheard some of their conversation.
What exactly did you hear?
Well, Stevie brought up Agatha's will and asked to be put back into the will. Agatha told Stevie no, but Stevie persisted. And I remember Agatha clearly saying, "I've missed you for years. I want to help you, which is why I will not give you a penny. Not now, not when I die."
What happened after Miss Lee told her granddaughter she would not include her in her will?
Stevie rushed out the door, and when she saw me there, she whispered under her breath, "Don't count your millions just yet." After that, I just took Agatha to lunch.
Did you join her?
No, I went to the drugstore for some toiletries. With 3 people in the house, we were running low on some things.
Did you ever pick Miss Lee up from lunch?
Yes, we headed right home and got there around 2 p.m.
What happened after you got home?
Agatha went to take a nap. Later, I made dinner for Stevie and Agatha, which I brought them around 6:30. After cleaning up downstairs, I was in my room around 7:30, and I went to sleep at 9:30.
And did you eat dinner with Miss Lee and Miss Rogers?
No, I took it downstairs. Agatha and Stevie were eating in the study, reconnecting, which connects to Agatha's bedroom.
Was that the last time that you ever saw Miss Lee?
That's the last time I saw her alive, right outside her bedroom with Stevie. Then the next morning, I went to wake her. I found she had passed away. Even as a nurse, there was nothing I could do.
What happened after you discovered Miss Lee had died?
I was in shock. Stevie called the police, and there was an investigation done by a detective from the police department. But before the police showed up, somebody that Stevie hired, Mr. Bond, showed up to the house.
Now, did you hear Mr. Bond testify today?
I did.
And did you hear him say that he broke into your room on the 15th?
I did. I never gave him permission to do that. I didn't know who he was when he showed up, and he didn't even tell me he went into my room until a week later.
Do you know how long he was in your room?
No, I have no idea.
Do you know what he did while he was in your room?
Absolutely not.
So, Miss Mars, how involved were you in the police's investigation?
I tried to cooperate with the police department as much as possible. After the autopsy revealed that Agatha died from taking chloroangemine, I was shocked. I had never seen those pills in her house, and when they asked to keep searching after the toxicology report, I had no problem with them looking around to find any answers.
Do you remember who all searched Lee Manor?
Detective Kahn from the police department, and she gave Mr. Bond some sort of privileges. They were the only two I saw enter Lee Manor to investigate.
And while the two searched Lee Manor, do you know if Detective Kahn watched over Mr. Bond the entire time?
No, I don't. I have no idea what Mr. Bond did, but when they came outside, they had found a black bag with pills in my closet.
Did you own a bag with pills inside of it?
No, when they showed me that bag, I had never seen it in my life. They found cigarettes, but I don't smoke. They found an unmarked bottle of pills, but as a nurse, I don't own anything like that. They said it was chloroangemine, but Agatha is allergic to that, so I make sure it's not even kept in the house and that everyone knows. I felt like I was set up.
And before Miss Lee had died, did you tell anyone else about her deathly allergy to chloroangemine?
Yes, Stevie Rogers.
So, Miss Mars, were you involved in the death of Agatha Lee?
No, she was my boss. But after 10 years of living with her, she was family. I could never do something like that.
Thank you, Miss Mars. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Miss Mars.
Good morning.
Before Miss Rogers arrived in 2018, you've been working for Miss Lee for about 10 years, right?
That's right.
In fact, you were so close to Miss Lee that in 2018, she named you the sole heir to her will. Isn't that true?
She did.
You knew that meant you'd be receiving about $20 million once Miss Lee passed away, right?
That's right.
And you needed that money, didn't you?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
I mean that you needed that $20 million, right?
I sent all my money to my family, so that's what I would have done with it.
So that's right. Your family needed that money.
Sure.
Your sister was sick, like you said.
Yes, she's been sick her whole life.
Like you said on direct examination, there were medical bills and expenses that your family couldn't afford to cover.
That's right. We've been able to scrap through.
That $20 million, well, that would have changed everything for you, right?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean.
I mean that $20 million, well, that would have made your life a lot easier, wouldn't it?
Sure.
It would have made it so your family never had to worry about money again.
Sure.
But just a few months after you were named the sole heir to the will, Miss Rogers moved into Lee Manor, right?
That's right.
You knew that Miss Rogers was Miss Lee's granddaughter, right?
That's right. I'm glad Agatha got to spend time with her granddaughter before she passed.
You knew Miss Rogers was Miss Lee's only living family, right?
That's right.
And you know, prior to 2018, Miss Rogers was the one who was named the sole heir to Miss Lee's will, right?
Yes, I was a witness to that will.
And so once Miss Rogers moved in, your relationship with Miss Lee changed, didn't it?
We spent less time together, but I suggested Agatha take more time to be with Stevie.
So it's true that Miss Lee spent less time with you,
That's right. I suggested it.
and she spent a lot more time with Miss Rogers.
Right, but our relationship didn't change.
Then on August 14th, you overheard a conversation between Miss Rogers and Miss Lee, right?
That's right.
In that conversation, you heard them talking about Miss Lee's inheritance, didn't you?
I did. Stevie brought that up.
that was the same inheritance that you believed that you would receive, right?
Yes.
And so right after that conversation, you were with Miss Lee, isn't that right?
Yes, I was taking her to lunch.
And while you were taking her to lunch, you heard her call her lawyer, Kirby. Am I right?
Yes,
Now, you know that's the same lawyer that did her will reading. Isn't that true?
that's right.
So, Miss Mars, I'd like to talk to you about what you did in the wake of that phone call. You went to a pharmacy, didn't you?
Yes, drugstore.
Now, you know at that pharmacy that they sold chloroandramine?
I didn't look specifically. I assume, I guess.
You know it's commonly available at most pharmacies, right?
That's right.
So at that pharmacy, you don't actually remember exactly what you bought, do you?
Not specifically.
You don't have a receipt for what you bought that day,
No, Agatha gave me cash when I was buying things like that.
but you also don't have the receipt, right?
No.
Well, you know that Miss Lee has a fatal allergy to chloroandramine, don't you?
Right. I make sure everyone that's staying with us knows.
So you were aware of that.
Everyone in the house was.
You knew that Miss Lee took arthritis medication,
Yes, Winterin was part of her regimen.
and you knew that that arthritis medication looked identical to chloroandramine, right?
That's right.
If the two got mixed up, you wouldn't be able to tell, right?
Likely nobody would.
And you were the one that handled all of Miss Lee's medication, weren't you?
That's right. I would refill her weekly pill organizer on Saturday nights.
And whenever you give her her pills, well, she would take whatever you gave her, right?
Yes, Agatha was a very good patient.
And on the night of August 14th, Miss Lee's pill organizer was in her room, like it always is, right?
I believe so. I didn't really see it that day.
But you're aware that but you know it's always in her room, right?
That's usually where she keeps it.
And then earlier that night, you actually unlocked the door to Miss Lee's room, didn't you?
Yes, I had gone in through the study and it's closer to my room to go out through Agatha's door.
So you unlocked her door, that's a yes.
Yes,
And I'd like to talk to you about the next morning. You're the one that found Miss Lee dead, right?
yes,
When Detective Bond asked to search your room, you refused, right?
yeah, I didn't know who he was.
Objection, Your Honor, substantially more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard?
Yes.
It's this witness's right, it's her constitutional right to deny a search and seizure. To enter this testimony onto the record has little to no probative value, but it serves a great risk to substantially prejudice the jury against Ms. Mars.
Your Honor, pursuant to stipulation 12, the court has already overruled all constitutional objections in this case, including those in relation to Ms. Bond's search. Detective
Can
Bond.
somebody read me that ruling
Yes, Your Honor.
or put it on the screen or whatever? Or,
Sure, I can screen share. Just give me 1 second, Your Honor.
okay.
Sorry.
It's going to be easier if you read it. It's totally fine.
Yeah,
Just read
sure.
it. Yeah.
So stipulation 12 says the court has considered and overruled all constitutional objections, including but not limited to those regarding Exhibit 13 and Bond's search of Mars's bedroom on August 15th, 2018.
Your Honor, that still doesn't give opposing counsel a right to substantially prejudice the jury against Ms. Mars' constitutional right to deny search and seizure.
This is an interesting problem. I think the prior judge's ruling was probably like a suppression ruling, right? Like we can still talk about what was found in the search because the search was not a constitutional violation, which is kind of weird because this is a civil case and it's kind of a mess.
Your Honor, if I may explain.
You may.
So aside from the constitutional grounds for this objection and just focusing on the more prejudicial and probative aspect of it,
Okay.
it's incredibly probative that the morning after Miss Lee was killed, Miss Mars denied a search of her room because later we know what was found in her room. Now, throughout today's case, the defendant has tried to assert, well, those were planted there. I didn't know those were there. But it's certainly probative for the jury to hear that she wouldn't let a search happen that next morning because, according to her, she had nothing to hide.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of prejudice that defense counsel is concerned about. If this were a criminal case, this would be a very easy decision. Sustain.
Move to strike any testimony if given.
I don't think she answered. To the extent that we can strike questions, we can do that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Maybe she answered. That's stricken if she answered.
Ms. Mars, you're aware of how Miss Lee died, right? You saw the toxicology report?
That's right. I was very surprised.
You know that she was poisoned with chloroandramine?
I don't know how she got those pills, but I know that's how she was killed.
You know that there was a search of the house later, right? On August 21st?
That's right, but this time by the police department.
You know that the police found a black bag in your closet, right?
I don't know who found the bag.
Ms. Rogers, you know there was a black bag found in your closet during that search by the police, right?
By Detective Kahn and Mr. Bond. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly who found it.
Ms. Mars, my question's different. You know that there was a black bag found in your closet, right?
But by somebody involved in the search.
That's right. During that search, you know there was a black bag found in your closet. It's a simple question.
Yes.
You know that that bag had chloroandramine in it, right?
That's what I was told.
And you're aware that that bag had your fingerprint on it. Isn't that right?
That's right. I'd never seen it before, but in the mess it was in my closet, maybe I touched it.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. No further questions, Your Honor.
You're direct?
None, Your Honor.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Mars. Defense, you can call your next witness.
The defense calls Mr. Ryan Cabrera to the stand. May I proceed? Hello, please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Ryan Cabrera. It's spelled like Brian, but no B.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Cabrera?
I'm a biographer. I never was really great at making new friends through small talk, but over the years I learned that people love to talk about themselves, so that's what I do. I listen, and then I write, and I write.
And how did you become involved in today's case?
I was staying near Lee Manor while interviewing the Agatha Lee. She was a legend to me, one of the best-selling authors in the history of Midlands.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, I'd like to talk about your relationship with Agatha Lee, if that's all right. How did you two first meet?
Well, in 2015, I decided to roll the dice and write Agatha's publishers, hoping to score a biography. Most people, they never write me back. But 3 years later, I got the go-ahead from her publisher and an invite to Lee Manor.
Well, when was the first time you arrived at Lee Manor?
Well, I got the reply letter on February 1st, 2018. I could never forget that day. A week later, I arrived on Agatha's steps and excited to meet her. I hadn't been that nervous since my high school prom date. She answered the door and we got to know each other soon thereafter.
Was that the only time you met with Agatha Lee?
No, over the spring and the summer, we continued to grow our relationship.
How often would you meet with Ms. Lee?
At least twice a week for about 6 months. We usually met in her study at Lee Manor. Nothing like a room full of books to make a nerd like me feel at home.
And what would the two of you discuss specifically?
Well, we talked about all aspects of our life. What made us happy, what perplexed us. Agatha asked me about my life and my writing as much as I asked her about hers. Eventually, Agatha even opened up to me about her life and her granddaughter, Stevie, and her caretaker, Drew Mars.
All right, well, let's take those two one at a time, starting with Ms. Mars. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Ms. Mars?
Yeah, I did.
From your interactions with her and with Agatha Lee, how would you describe their relationship?
Well, whenever I visited Lee Manor, I would usually see Miss Mars around the house, cleaning, cooking, helping out. The two of them were close, from gardening to backgammon. They would do everything together. It was almost like Drew was Agatha's granddaughter. I remember once she was holding her hand up the stairs in the parlor. The love and affection were obvious from both. I even remember early on Agatha telling me that Drew was more than a caretaker, that Drew was family.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, this statement is an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033, then existing mental, emotional state or physical condition. Specifically, it discusses Agatha Lee's emotional state at that time in relation to Drew Mars. Therefore, it's admissible under 8033.
The statement is, just a second, is the statement you're objecting to Drew is family?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense counsel, are you offering that to prove that Drew is in fact family?
No, Your Honor, that statement isn't being used for the truth of the matter asserted because that statement isn't in fact true.
Plaintiff's counsel, response.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe this statement was almost as if Drew Mars was family to Miss Lee. And if defense counsel is not using it for the truth of the matter, then I asked what the relevance was.
I don't remember that being the phrasing this witness used. I understand that might be phrasing that this witness used before. I recall the testimony being Drew Mars is family or something, is family. Am I remembering it wrong, plaintiff's counsel? Plaintiff's counsel, am I remembering it wrong?
Your Honor,
it's okay if I am, you can be honest.
Well, my recollection was that the statement was that Drew Mars was like family to Miss Lee in the context of explaining, the witness was explaining that they spent a lot of time together, that they hung out a lot. So in that context, I do believe the statement was like family.
Okay, certainly that has to be what defense is trying to convey to the jury, that Ms. Lee thought of Drew Mars like family. Am I understanding that correctly, defense counsel?
That is what's being conveyed, and that's the relevance of this testimony. But the exact phrasing was Drew is family. That was the statement elicited.
Okay, so I'm not so concerned about the truth of the matter issue, since the truth that I think is actually why can't I speak? The substance that's trying to be conveyed is something about their relationship, that they're close, right? And that is what's actually being asserted, whether it's a metaphor or a simile or whatever, right? So can you respond to the relevance objection, defense counsel?
Well, Your Honor, under Rule 401, relevant evidence has to make a tendency of a fact of consequence more or less probable. Here, this testimony makes it less probable that Drew Mars would kill Agatha Lee because she felt close to her, because she was like family that she had far away, except this person she lived with for nearly a decade.
Okay, so now you've articulated a theory of relevance that makes me concerned about hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, it appears as though defense counsel is indeed using this statement for the truth of the matter to show that Miss Lee believed that Drew Mars was like family, and therefore, because they are using it for the truth of the matter, it is hearsay.
Yeah, I'm worried about that. Defense counsel, what do you say to that?
Your Honor, additionally, this statement will be foundational to any other observations that Mr. Cabrera had regarding Ms. Mars and Ms. Agatha Lee, and showing that there was no further observations regarding Agatha Lee and Ms. Mars that were problematic in any way.
So you're saying this evidence is especially useful to you because it is the foundation for more evidence that you'd like to talk about. That's not a response to hearsay. And in fact, that makes me more concerned about hearsay because hearsay shouldn't be the foundation for other stuff. I think if you can just ask about that other stuff, you'd be fine.
Well, Your Honor,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Your Honor, if I may, if we're going back to a hearsay argument, then I would maintain my prior response regarding 8033, that this discusses her emotional state at the time.
So she is in the moment feeling close to Drew Mars. Is that the idea?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your response to that, plaintiff's counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. 8033 is not a blanket rule. It doesn't cover every statement regarding someone's personal feelings. 8033 is very specific in that someone must be speaking from a momentary emotion. Miss Lee's general fondness for Drew Mars, general fondness for the defendant, well, those statements don't fall under 8033 and are still therefore hearsay.
I'm going to sustain the plaintiff's objection and strike whatever testimony was given. You can still ask about all the other stuff you were just talking about, defense counsel.
Just to clarify, Your Honor, the statements that are stricken are just the hearsay statements, not the rest of the answer that didn't involve hearsay.
Oh, absolutely. Only the
Okay.
statement, Drew Mars is family or is like family, whatever the testimony was, only that sentence is stricken.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Cabrera, from your interactions, were you ever concerned about how Ms. Mars was interacting with Agatha Lee?
No, never. Miss Mars was always gentle, even when she asked Agatha to go for a walk. And Agatha was always sweet. I never saw the two of them so much as disagree.
All right, well, now I'd like to move on to talk about Stevie Rogers. Did you ever meet Ms. Stevie Rogers?
Yes, I first met Stevie Rogers at the beginning of July in 2018.
From your interactions with Ms. Rogers and Agatha Lee, what was your impression of their relationship?
Well, the thing is that I had heard about Stevie well before she showed up on the doorstep of Lee Manor. The thing is, I had never actually
Objection,
seen
Your
her.
Honor, to hearsay.
What's the statement?
Well, Your Honor, the testimony that the witness had heard about Stevie prior implies that the only knowledge they have of Stevie Rogers is through hearsay. And additionally, I would object to lack of foundation. The witness can't testify to their perception of that relationship when we've heard no foundation as to how they understand the relationship between Stevie Rogers and Miss Agatha Lee.
Okay, so we have two objections. One to this statement, I heard about Stevie.
Well,
I had only
Your
heard
Honor,
about Stevie.
Your Honor, the only way that this witness could know about their relationship is through these statements. And so
I understand. So I think I understand your objection to be, this witness is about to talk about what their relationship was like. And this witness just admitted that the only way they know is by hearing about Stevie, right? So you're not objecting to, you're actually not objecting to hearsay of the statement, I heard about Stevie. You're
No, Your
saying
Honor.
that statement is evidence that the rest of it lacks foundation except for hearsay foundation. Is that right?
yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Got it. Thanks for going with me there. Defense counsel, your response.
Your Honor, at this time, Mr. Cabrera is actually going to testify about personal interactions and observations, not specifically just statements about Agatha Lee's speaking towards Stevie Rogers. Because of that, at this time, it's still admissible as Mr. Cabrera is still laying the foundation for that. Whether or not he'd first heard about Stevie Rogers prior to these interactions does not necessitate that all of his impression comes from any information he'd heard prior to meeting Ms. Rogers.
I understand that. So you're saying he might be just limiting the scope of his knowledge. He's telling the jury, hey, I don't know about this stuff, but I know about this other stuff.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm sorry. Was your question about Rogers and Lee's relationship during some earlier period of time? Can you remind me what your question was, counsel?
Your Honor, my question was, Mr. Cabrera, from your impression, from your observations of Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers, what was your impression of their relationship? That was my exact question.
Okay. So you're asking about this witness's impression of their relationship over like all of time, including the time that he had direct interactions with them.
Specifically his direct interactions, so what observations he had for them. Though the majority of the time in which he's had this information was when Ms. Rogers was present with Agatha Lee.
Got it. I understand. I'm going to overrule plaintiff counsel's objection. There might be some testimony in here that you could object to, but we haven't gotten to it yet.
Yes, Your Honor.
No. Now, Mr. Cabrera, from your observations, what was your impression of Agatha Lee's relationship to Stevie Rogers?
Well, I had heard Stevie's name a couple times well before she'd ever showed up on the doorstep of Lee Manor. The thing is, I had never seen her until July of 2018. There were no photos of her hanging in Agatha's house. I got the sense that Stevie had put a lot of distance between herself and Agatha Lee. It made sense
Your
to
Honor.
me why Agatha wrote her grandson out of the will.
Objection, Your Honor, to
Yes.
lack of foundation.
I got the impression she had distanced herself. Is that what we're objecting to?
Yes,
Defense
Your
counsel?
Honor.
Your Honor, this witness is actually giving their lay opinion based off of the information they elicited, specifically there not being pictures of Stevie Rogers on the wall, the fact that Stevie Rogers had never visited during the time in which Mr. Cabrera was there, and the fact that Stevie Rogers had basically been non-existent in Agatha Lee's life prior to Stevie Rogers arriving.
This witness is also speculating about the reason that those things are absent, though. I'm going to sustain plaintiff's objection
Yes, Your Honor.
and strike just that sentence. So the sentence that the witness was saying when he stopped is fine, because that was past the sentence that was objected to. Okay, so you can start back there.
Mr. Cabrera, would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, counselor.
From your observations, and just keep it to your observations, Mr. Cabrera, what was your impression of Agatha Lee's relationship with her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers?
Well, there isn't much to talk about, really. I never saw Stevie's photos throughout Lee Manor. We never really discussed Stevie Rogers at all throughout our conversations while I was writing her biography. It seemed like Stevie was not in Agatha's life at all to me, and it made sense to me why Agatha told me about her
Objection,
decision
Your Honor.
about the will.
It was my
To-
understanding that, yes, Your Honor, unless I'm misunderstanding, it was my understanding that testimony has been stricken.
So just now he testified. It was my understanding that Stevie Rogers wasn't in Agatha's life at all. That's different from, it's my understanding that Ms. Lee had distanced herself from Rogers. I see that as different. I'm going to overrule your objection.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, when was the last time you spoke with Agatha Lee?
Well, we went out to lunch on August 14th. I remember Agatha got a steak, but I just had a chickpea salad.
Do you know what happened to Agatha Lee after you saw her?
Well, that was the last time I saw her live. I know she went back to Lee Manor afterward. During lunch, we spoke about Stevie. We talked about Stevie and their relationship.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, what happened after you had lunch with Agatha Lee?
Well, Drew Mars called me the day that it happened. The day that Agatha had passed away, Drew called me and she told me the news. We both cried on the phone.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, I want to talk more about what happened after Agatha Lee died. Were you ever contacted by someone named Noura Khan? She might have identified herself as a detective.
Only once. A week after Agatha passed away, Noura Khan asked me to return to Lee Manor. I thought it was to tell her what I saw on the 14th and what Aggie and I talked about, but instead, someone else gave a speech accusing Drew Mars of murder. I think his name was Mr. Bond.
Do you know who this Bond person was?
No, but I found out later that they were some kind of private investigator for hire. That struck me as odd because I initially thought that Mr. Bond was a cop.
Had you ever seen him before August 22nd?
No,
Had they ever interviewed you regarding the death of Agatha Lee?
no, sir. We never spoke about what I saw at Lee Manor on August 14th.
Did they ever ask you to make a sworn statement?
No, sir.
Did they ever question you about Stevie Rogers?
Not at all.
Did this Bond person ever contact you at all in connection to the death of Agatha Lee?
No. My only interaction with Mr. Bond was when he accused Drew Mars of murdering Agatha. The day after that speech, Drew Mars was in handcuffs.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Mr. Cabrera.
Good morning.
So you've been to Lee Manor before, right?
Yeah, I went twice a week, starting in February of 2018.
And you're fairly familiar with the defendant, Drew Mars, right?
Yeah, I would see her working around the house.
And you know that it was Drew Mars's job to administer Miss Lee her medication, right?
I think that was one of her duties. Yeah, Drew Mars, she wore a lot of hats.
And you yourself actually saw the defendant administer Miss Lee her medication. Isn't that right?
One time I did, yes.
You saw the defendant give Miss Lee some small purple pills. Isn't that right?
Yeah, they were out of her pill box.
Right. And the only person you ever saw handling Miss Lee's medication was the defendant, right?
That's true. Miss Lee usually took her pills at night, and usually I go to bed by 7.
So, Mr. Cabrera, I want to talk to you about the meeting you had with Miss Lee on August 14th. You said that you met her for lunch, right?
Mm-hmm. We did. Went to a steakhouse.
And you said that afterwards you went home.
That's true.
You never went back to Lee Manor that day?
No, I didn't.
You never saw Miss Lee that evening?
No, I said goodbye to her on lunch, and we made plans to meet again. The last I knew, she was a healthy woman.
So as far as you can tell us, since you weren't at Lee Manor that night, you don't know who swapped those pills, do you?
I don't know anything about anyone swapping pills, counselor.
So finally, Ms. Cabrera, I want to talk to you about your relationship a little bit more with Miss Mars. You're a fan of her writing, right?
I'm a fan of Miss Lee's writing, Agatha Lee's writing.
Yes, yes. You said on direct examination that you saw her as a bit of a legend, right?
Yeah, I think everyone does. So does the Pulitzer Prize.
And you're also aware that pending the outcome of today's trial, Drew Mars is set to inherit the entirety of Miss Lee's estate. Is that right?
That's how I understand it. Either all the money goes to Miss Mars, her caretaker, or Stevie, her grandson.
That's right, Ms. Cabrera. And you're aware of this because of a phone conversation you had with the defendant prior to today's hearing, right?
That's not true. It was all over the news when Agatha died. That's how I learned.
But you also, it's true though that you spoke with the defendant over the phone, right, prior to today's hearing regarding the estate.
That's true. Drew Mars called me once in July, actually. I don't get a lot of incoming calls, so that was nice.
And Drew Mars also told you that Miss Lee was very fond of you, right?
Yeah.
And she said that if you were interested, that you could have a piece of her estate if you wanted, right?
She did. She offered me a couple of Agatha's books from her book collection.
Well, it was actually your idea to receive that part of the estate, right?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that they got into the right hands of a collector and not someone who just wanted to cash out.
Well, that's because that you knew that that book collection contained a number of unpublished works, right?
That's
Mr.
true.
Cabrera? And you'd agree with me that that unpublished works from such a famous author, well, they must be worth a fortune, right?
They're priceless to me, counselor.
But you also agree with me that unpublished works from such a famous author, they must have some type of monetary value, right?
I guess, but I would never sell those books.
And you're confident that for your testimony today, you will be receiving that collection of unpublished books, right, Mr. Cabrera?
That's not true.
Mr. Cabrera, is it your testimony today that with your testimony in today's trial, you're not confident that you'll be receiving those books?
Well, I don't know the outcome of the trial, counselor.
Mr. Cabrera, I want to be very clear. If in today's trial, Drew Mars does receive that $20 million, you're confident that for your testimony, you will be receiving those unpublished books. Yes or no?
That's what she told me, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Cabrera. Nothing further.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Cabrera, is your testimony in today's trial in direct connection with you receiving some old books from Agatha Lee?
No, counselor. I never spoke to the police or anyone during the investigation. I'm just scared to tell the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. We're going to go directly into closings if there's no objection. We're pushing up against all loss. Do we have any big concerns about that?
Not from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Cool. All right. I'm going to ask everyone to switch back to speaker view. And we're ready for plaintiff's closing whenever you are.
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, just give me 1 moment. Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Your Honor, counsel, ladies and gentlemen, $20 million, 2 pills, 1 fingerprint. It's these 3 pieces of evidence that make the defendant's wrongdoing clear. And that's why, throughout the course of today's trial, this defendant has lied about each one of these pieces of evidence. You see, the defendant tried to tell you that $20 million was never in jeopardy. That the bag of pills found in her closet in her room, they weren't hers. And that the fingerprint found on the bag of those pills, well, she doesn't know how that got there. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence doesn't lie. But today it's shown that this defendant did. This entire case tracks back to 1 meeting. On August 14th, the defendant overheard Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee having a conversation about their will. As Ms. Rogers told us, Ms. Lee included Stevie in the will. She was happy that they'd reconnected, but that was a problem for the defendant. You see, the defendant thought that they'd be receiving that will, that they'd be receiving that $20 million, and it would change her life. She and her family needed that money. So when the defendant saw their inheritance slipping away, they decided to take action. Now, the defendant will have you believe that's not the way that conversation between Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee went, that Miss Lee refused to include Stevie in the will. So what do you do? What do you do when you have conflicting testimony? You look at the evidence. We saw that Miss Lee called her lawyer immediately after that meeting to schedule an appointment. Now, does it make any sense to have a meeting about your will, decide not to change the will, call the lawyer that handles your will, and set up an appointment? To what? Not change the will? That doesn't make any sense, ladies and gentlemen. Use common sense. This defendant thought if she lied about the $20 million, this would all go away. Then you heard about the 2 pills. Agatha Lee was deathly allergic to chloroandramine, a drug commonly available at any pharmacy. So what did the defendant do after she overheard that conversation? She went to the pharmacy, paid in cash, and threw away the receipt. Now, what did she buy? In her own words, I don't fully remember. But members of the jury, read between the lines. The defendant happens to have forgotten what she bought when she was at the store that sold the same pills that were used to kill Miss Lee on the day that she died. If the defendant's story seems a little too convenient, question it. What did they sell at the store? Chloroandramine. What was Miss Lee poisoned with? Chloroandramine. What was found in the defendant's closet? Chloroandramine. So members of the jury, can you guess as to what she bought that day? The answer is chloroandramine. Next, the defendant had to switch Miss Lee's arthritis pills for poison. As she admitted on cross-examination, the pills were identical in shape, smell, color, in every discernible way to Miss Lee's arthritis medication. It would be impossible to tell the difference once she'd made the switch. So she waited until she was sure no one would see her, until the defendant went downstairs. At 9:30 p.m., she snuck into Miss Lee's bedroom through the door she'd unlocked earlier that night. The defendant carefully replaced that night's dose of arthritis medication, the chloroandramine she'd bought earlier. 2 pills is all it did. All the defendant had to do now was wait. What the defendant didn't know is that Miss Rogers saw her walking towards that room, saw her with her hand clenched, carrying the pills on her way to kill Agatha. The next morning, she found Miss Lee dead, just like she'd planned. But the defendant's plan wasn't perfect. She didn't plan for the police to investigate the death of an 82-year-old woman who died in her sleep too closely. The defendant didn't plan for Stevie Rogers to hire a private detective. The defendant didn't plan for her fingerprint to be on the bag with the poison in it. $20 million, 2 pills, 1 fingerprint. 3 pieces of evidence that directly link this defendant to the murder of Agatha Lee. Members of the jury, I've said the word murder a lot today, but we're not here for a murder trial because Ms. Rogers is suing the defendant under something called the Slayer statute. As the judge will explain to you in a minute, that's a fairly straightforward concept. We had to prove to you just that it was more likely than not that the defendant was responsible for Miss Lee's death. And we've done exactly that. Members of the jury, if you believe it's more likely than not that Drew Mars is lying about that conversation she overheard, if you believe it's more likely than not that she bought chloroangiomine pills at that pharmacy, if you believe it's more likely than not that this defendant snuck into Miss Lee's room and switched out her medication for poison, then you must find her liable. The defendant took advantage of an 82-year-old woman who trusted her like a granddaughter. As an 82-year-old woman she'd lived with for more than a decade. And as a result of the defendant's actions, Ms. Rogers lost the only remaining family she had. And the defendant did it all for $20 million. This case isn't complicated. Allow Miss Lee's inheritance to be returned to its rightful heir. Find the defendant liable.
Thank you. Defense closing whenever you're ready.
Just one moment. $20 million, 2 people. If only they could pin it on one woman. For 7 years, Stevie Rogers never visited her grandmother, never wrote her letters, never responded to her phone calls or her letters, never spoke to her more than once. For 7 years, Stevie Rogers was distanced from her grandmother. That only changed in July of 2018, when Ms. Rogers made a spontaneous return. That changed after Ms. Rogers had been disinherited. That changed in June when she'd run out of her trust fund. For a month and a half, Stevie Rogers spent time with her grandmother, trying to get back in her good graces, trying to get back into her will. When Stevie Rogers was told no, when Agatha Lee told Stevie Rogers that she would not be returning into her estate, that's when Stevie Rogers got desperate. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Rogers is suing Drew Mars for the estate of Agatha Lee. In this lawsuit, she's suing under the Slayer statute. That means that she has to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that Ms. Mars knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee. Now, that means she can't just tell you that it's possible that she caused that death, not that it's likely. No, she has to show that it's more likely than not that Drew Mars caused the death of Agatha Lee. Now, we, as the defense, we don't have a burden of proof. We didn't have to call any witnesses. We didn't have to present any evidence. We didn't have to ask any questions, but we did. We called Ms. Mars to the stand and Mr. Cabrera. We presented a photograph of the closet where the drugs were found, and we asked several questions. We presented you all with what really happened. Let's go all the way back to August 2018. It's 11 a.m. on August 14th, and Ms. Rogers has just been told no. She won't be getting that $20 million inheritance that she's here suing for today. That's when she hatches a plan. That's when she calls the linchpin in today's case. That's when she calls Mr. Marty Bond. She calls Mr. Bond and she has him purchase a bottle of chloroandromine, something that she already admitted today that she knew could kill her grandmother. Now, today, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't hear from Detective Noura Khan, but she was brought up several times in trial, but you will get to see her police report because it's already been admitted. This is that police report. And when you look through it, I want you to focus on this section. This section where Detective Khan goes above and beyond to look at several different locations, pharmacies where chloroandromine could be sold, but is missing something. She checks to see if Agatha Lee purchased chloroandromine. She checks to see if Drew Mars purchased chloroandromine. She checks to see if Stevie Rogers purchased chloroandromine. But she does not check to see if Marty Bond does. Later that day, Mr. Bond returns the bottle of chloroandromine to Stevie Rogers. You heard that Ms. Rogers was in the house on August 14th, 2018, the night Agatha Lee died. You knew that she had the knowledge that those pills would kill her. Because she was there, she had the opportunity to switch those pills. So let's look at what happened next. It's the next day, it's August 15th, and it's chaotic. Stevie Rogers immediately tells Marty Bond that her grandmother has been murdered. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. How in the world could Stevie Rogers possibly know that her grandmother had been murdered? There'd been no evidence yet. Mr. Bond arrives before the fuzz, as he said. Mr. Bond arrives with just enough time to pick up those pill bottles and put them in a bag, but not enough to plant them. Not yet. Mr. Bond had 5 minutes before Detective Noura Khan arrived. Enough time to swap of fingerprints with his decades of expertise, but not enough to plant it. But that's when he gets his saving grace. Detective Khan asks to speak with Drew Rogers and leaves Mr. Bond and Ms. Rogers alone for half an hour. For half an hour, they are alone in what would later become a crime scene. For half an hour, Detective Bond breaks into the room of Drew Mars. He admitted it during his cross, his direct. During that half hour, he breaks into that computer and finds evidence he's looking for. But during that half hour, that's when he plants the drugs. That's when he plants that black bag. That's when he plants it with that fingerprint that he'd already had access to from being in Lee Manor before the police. Once he's done in Ms. Mars's room, he's basically ready. Later on, the police have a formal search of the house, a formal search of Lee Manor. And Stevie Rogers, she's adamant that Bond be there. She's adamant that Bond be part of that search. The only civilian that is allowed in that house is Bond. And he's there just in time to make sure that that bag is found by Detective Khan. And ladies and gentlemen, the rest is history. Stevie Rogers is here suing today for $20 million, trying to pin it on Drew Mars. Drew Mars, who'd lived with Agatha Lee for 10 years, who loved her and cared for her like she was her own family. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, Stevie Rogers became family in name only over a decade. Just because Drew Mars wasn't related by blood doesn't mean she wasn't Agatha Lee's family. The plaintiff would have you believe that Drew Mars was the one that did this, that Drew Mars was the one that orchestrated this whole thing. But I want to ask the plaintiff a couple of questions. I want you to hear these questions, because if the plaintiff doesn't answer them in their rebuttal, that means that either they don't know what happened or they don't want you to know. So think about that. Think about these questions. Why, if Detective Bond was such a thorough investigator, if he was supposed to be an impartial party, did he have to break into someone's room to get evidence? Why couldn't he wait for a search warrant? Why did he have to go around the law without anyone's permission to get what he wanted? If he was such an impartial investigator as he'd have you believe, why didn't he question Stevie Rogers? Why didn't he look through her emails? Why didn't he even ask Ryan Cabrera if he knew anything? Because he wasn't there for that. He was there to help Rogers. He was there for his $35,000 paycheck and whatever Ms. Rogers has promised him about this estate. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, that's what happened on August 14th and 15th, and that's what's happening here today. When the judge instructs you all regarding your jury instructions, she's going to tell you that you have two tools at your disposal: your common sense and your life experience. You're going to take those two tools with you, and you're going to go through the evidence that you heard today. I want you to keep everything that you've heard in mind. Keep in mind that no one could tell you how that black bag got there. Keep in mind that no one could tell you that there were fingerprints on the pill bottle where that particular drug was found. Find Ms. Mars not liable, because Stevie Rogers was distanced, disinherited, and desperate. Thank you.
Rebuttal whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before I begin, I'd just like to inquire as to how much time I have and make sure the two sides are in agreement on that.
You have 1 minute and 50 seconds left.
Agree.
That's good.
Yep, agree.
Thank you. Over and over today, you've heard Mr. Nolan say $20 million for two people if they could pin it on one person. That it was actually Miss Rogers who killed Miss Lee. And with the help of Detective Bond, she's now framing Miss Mars. That this was all some big setup. That doesn't add up. Look who they called to tell you that. Miss Mars, who has $20 million to lose here today, and Mr. Cabrera, who's testifying because he thinks he'll be rewarded with a series of unpublished books worth a fortune. And Mr. Nolan asked you, why did Mr. Bond not wait for the police? Why didn't he investigate Stevie Rogers? Why did he only look in to Drew Mars? Because that's what made sense. Ladies and gentlemen, all we have is speculation and the word of the defendant that Stevie Rogers had anything to do with this. Miss Rogers had no idea what medications her grandmother took. Miss Rogers never visited a pharmacy to purchase chloroandramine. Miss Rogers didn't even know that chloroandramine and the arthritis medication looked the same. But the defendant knew all of it. Then they want you to believe that Detective Bond somehow acquired a bag of chloroandramine, then with the police present, planted the bag with the pills in it in the defendant's closet, then planted the defendant's fingerprints on that bag. At some point, it's clear where the defendant's story diverges from reality, where the defendant's story diverges from the evidence. $20 million, 2 pills, 1 fingerprint. The evidence points directly to Miss Mars. Find the defendant liable.
Thank you, everyone.
I've just alerted the tab room that the trial is done and they're going to turn off the live stream. I'm going to move the competitors into the breakout rooms while the judges finish their ballots.